Okay. Good afternoon, you guys. It is so good to see you. Welcome to week 3 of the Kansas Women Pioneers group. I wanted to tell you just a few things. First, a housekeeping thing. I want to encourage all of you who are in person in class today to go ahead and turn the volume off on your cellular phones. I am having so much fun pronouncing things today. So if you can turn those off or at least put them on silent mode. And for those of you who have questions, if you possibly can, we have a mic right here. So especially for the folks who are watching this online, if you could come up and ask your questions on the microphone, that way they can hear what you are saying. I want to let you know that at 2 o'clock or near 2 o'clock, we'll take a small break. And for those of you who are online, that might be 5 or 10 minutes, whatever. But we will come back and then we will finish up. And for those of you who are online, if you have any questions, submit them by email this first half, and we'll try and get to those during the second half of the class. And I need to read this, so please know that. Students, faculty, staff, and visitors must wear face coverings over their mouths and noses while on the Wichita State University campuses, in all hallways, public spaces, classrooms, and other common areas of the campus buildings. So I just want you to be aware of that. Now, for something else, I want to put in a small plug about these classes. If you guys have enjoyed this class, and I know some of you have also taken the class I have on Thursdays, Kansas and World War II, I want to encourage you, if you have any friends or relatives that are over the age of 60 in Kansas who are residents of Kansas, like you, they can take these classes free. All they have to do is enroll and register by September the 11th. And they can do that by contacting the continuing education office here at Wichita State University. So I just wanted to encourage you to do that because I do think these classes have been meaningful for folks. At least they've been letting me know that. And so I would encourage you to spread the word. This isn't just a Wichita thing, it's a Kansas thing. And so let folks know. And I think other people might enjoy them as well. I am so honored to do these classes. And one of the things that makes it special, as many of you know, I rely on all the 4 decades of being a Kansas journalist, and I love interviewing people and getting to know people. And when I put these classes together, I try to do that in a way that I think will be interesting. I try to bring in experts. I try to bring in people that are the most knowledgeable on subjects. And so we are really lucky in this class. We will have 2 speakers. One this week, Priska Barnes, and next week we'll have Erica Nelson. Both of them are being brought to us by grants from Humanities Kansas. And Priska today will be talking about Wichita's drugstore, Dockham drugstore sit-in. In July of 1958, Black students gathered at Wichita's Dockham drugstore to stage a peaceful protest against the unequal practice of segregation. Although this protest was not publicized in the newspapers in 1958, It is true, there were no records of it in the Wichita Eagle archives. I looked many, many times. The students participating in the demonstration worked to gain access to public spaces, like movie theaters and restaurants. This presentation discusses the detail of the sit-in, explore how these protests help transform the struggle for racial equality, and considers contemporary nonviolent protests. Priska Barnes, I am so pleased to introduce her, is the founder of Storytime Village, which is a nonprofit organization in Wichita that promotes reading among low-income children and families. She is passionate advocate for equity in education and literacy. She also has been a past director of the Kansas African American Museum. The Dockham sit-in was one of the first student-led lunch counter protests of the civil rights era, and it happened here in Kansas. It's important to revisit the circumstances, particularly as we recognize the event's 60th anniversary. Priska is quoted as saying that in her press release for Humanities Kansas. She also says that the Dockham Drugstore sit-in is part of Humanities Kansas movement of Ideas Speakers Bureau, featuring presentations and workshops designed to share stories that inspire, spark conversations that inform, and generate insights that strengthen civic engagement. So I want you to please welcome Priska Barnes.
Thank you, Becky. That was great. I don't always enjoy listening about myself, but thank you so much for the invitation to be here. Can you hear me? Okay, so I am trying to work through our new normal. Can you hear me now? You still can't hear me. Can you hear me now? Okay, so I'm going to speak very loud. All right, well, thank you. I don't want you to miss me thanking Becky for the introduction and the welcome to join you on today. I count it an honor and a privilege to be able to speak to you and join this class in particular that really speaks about women and their contributions to society, and then we also have some men in the house, and that really makes me feel good when men join in with women. That makes me feel really good. So Becky shared just a little. I need to do better. I'm yelling. Can we make it a little louder? Is it possible? It's as loud as it can get, but you can't hear me. Okay. Can I go under the shield? Can you hear me better now? Ta-da! We made it. Okay. Now I'm going to see if I can look down and do this at the same time. We're going to do magic today. It's a challenge, but we're going to meet the challenge. A little bit was shared about me, and I want to give you a little bit more just so you can get to know me a little bit better. I am a native Wichitan and a product of Wichita Public Schools. I left Wichita to attend college at Clark Atlanta University, a historically Black college in Atlanta, Georgia, sorry. But I returned to obtain my master's at Wichita State, and then I went on to have an interesting journey in the nonprofit world. I have served as the executive director of the Kansas African American Museum, as was stated, and I founded Storytime Village, a children's literacy nonprofit, and that is where I currently serve. Our mission is to inspire a lifelong love of reading for underserved Kansas children from birth to age 8. And wherever I go and wherever I present, there's always question marks that I can see over people's heads about why is this children's literacy nonprofit executive talking about the Dockham sit-in. But when I share with them my experience with the NAACP Youth Council, I served as the advisor for the NAACP Youth Council here in Wichita, which is the historic council that conducted the 1958 sit-in. But during that time serving as the advisor, I learned that many of the young people that came into that program knew little about the sit-in or its contribution to society or the nation. And then after learning that the students didn't know much about it, I quickly learned that adults in the community knew little about the story. And so it became my personal mission to share the Dockham story. And I worked through my literacy nonprofit to make it a reality. 2018 marked the 60th anniversary of the Dockham sit-in, and with the support of Humanities Kansas, the People, Pride, and Promise project was created. And the project is a documentary, a traveling exhibit, and a recently published children's book. Today, 62 years after the Dockham sit-in, you can still see the impact that the sit-in has made, and youth are still making their voices heard in contemporary nonviolent protests that are making history. So it is my goal to help to make sure that the story of the Dockham sit-in is heard all across the city of Wichita, the state of Kansas, the nation, and abroad. And I want to share about the participants that stood on courage, persistence, and careful planning to give the civil rights movement one of its greatest weapons in the struggle for equal accommodations. And in talking in preparation, before stepping onto this mic, I wanted to make sure that I include women and their contribution to this story as well. So I'm going to make sure that we talk about that today as well. So let's dive deep into the Dockham story, and we're going to start with this image. You can kind of see the image, but you can't see it until we... Do I need to move it? Did I do something? Okay. Thank you. So this grainy, and I got to get the mic back under this grainy image of students at a lunch counter is the only image captured from the Dockham sit-in. And it is said that a picture is worth 1,000 words, and we all know how powerful and vital the role that imagery played in shaping the racial and social justice movements. If you look at this next picture, am I advancing? There we go. An image can declare to the world that the high courts have banned segregation in public schools. It can show the heartbreak of a mother whose son was lynched for allegedly whistling at a white woman. An image can display the determination of a woman who dared to challenge the transportation laws in our country. Imagery fueled the civil rights movement. And today, images are telling stories and compelling people to action. But what if there were no cameras to capture the fight for equality? What if there were no news stations to cover the story on the evening news? What if there was just one small newspaper that took one picture? The story could easily get lost. The contribution could somehow be diminished. Today, I want to paint a picture that will bring to life the Dockham sit-in story and help you to see how a group of young people, including some powerful women, how they changed our nation. The 1950s was a time of great conflict. Racism was rampant in many parts of the country, especially in the South. The civil rights movement was exposing the divisions in American society in the South and throughout the nation. And while many significant acts took place outside of the South to help move the civil rights movement forward, most are not familiar with the fight for civil rights that took place outside of the South. While many are familiar with the 1954 landmark Brown v. Board of Education Supreme Court case, if we took a nationwide poll, I'm not sure many outside of Kansas would make the connection with the historic case in our state. The historic Brown v. Board case, which ruled unanimously the racial segregation of children in public schools nationwide was unconstitutional, in fact, took place in Topeka, Kansas. We know that, but does our nation really contribute that to our state? And in 1958, another courageous act took place in the heart of the nation. And this significant but mostly unheard story is what we're going to explore. There was nothing that would stand in the way of this determined group of NAACP students. Segregation wouldn't stand in their way, and like many places in the nation, Wichita, Kansas was segregated. Colored-only water fountains and bathrooms were the norm in our country, but in Wichita, we had our own segregation issues. One being that Black children and white children weren't allowed to swim in the same pools together. But that wouldn't stop this determined group of young people. The fact that they were attempting to change rules that had never been changed before wouldn't stop them. Fear would not stop them. Threats would not stop them. They were on a mission, and they would not stop until they were successful. So if you take a look at this image, there's Ron Walters, there's a representative from the National NAACP, there's Carol Parks Hahn now. Carol Parks is Ron Walters' cousin. And then there is Rosie Hughes, who was the student advisor for the youth council, the NAACP Youth Council. Now, Carol Parks, her family really were very engaged in the civil rights movement, and they were the ones that would host civil rights leaders who would come to visit Wichita. And they even hosted Emmett Till, if you're familiar, and we'll get to that. You'll see some video clips about Emmett Till shortly. His mother. They hosted his mother when she was on a tour uh, uh, through the nation, speaking about what Ugly had done to her son. So Carol Parks was a real integral part. She was vice president of the youth council. And then Rosie Hughes, she's still living. She was the youth advisor and very integral in making sure that the youth council was able to conduct the sit-in and have all the things that they needed to move forward. There were other women that were active and are still living, Peggy Wesley, Karen Ware, and then one woman who just recently passed when this project was brought to fruition in 2018, Joan Williams. She made her way, she pressed her way, and that showed the determination of the women that were a part of this movement. But she made her way to our event to have the documentary and to showcase the exhibition. And a week after she came and pressed her way for that event, she passed away. So she passed away in 2018. I want to share with you a video that will give you a little bit more in depth about the sit-in, and then we'll move forward. I see it.
The Dockham Sit-In. On July 19, 1958, a group of Wichita, Kansas NAACP Youth Council members filled the stools at the Dockham drugstore lunch counter to protest the store's discriminatory practices. A Kansas law created in 1874 prohibited unequal service in public places. However, restaurants in downtown Wichita still did not equally serve Black patrons. The Dockham drugstore was one of the most popular eating establishments downtown. They also had a reputation for discrimination. The Youth Council knew that if change could happen at Dockham, change could happen anywhere. For 3 trying weeks, the students sat with patience, waiting to rightfully be served. Through their unwavering persistence, the Wichita NAACP Youth Council conducted America's first student-led lunch counter sit-in. Their story is one of hope, faith, struggle, and triumph. This is the story of the Dockham sit-in. It is a story of hope. Yes, it is a story of faith. Yes, and with courage endurance, this story inspires us all. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it is a story of struggle. Yeah, but it is a story of triumph. Yeah, and with courage and endurance, this story inspires us all. And he
We honor these young people because they conducted their courageous struggle against segregation. Those were the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. at the 50th anniversary of the National NAACP Convention, where he recognized the 1958 Wichita Youth Council for their successful Dockham Lunch Counter sit-in. The Dockham sit-in was America's first successful student-led lunch counter sit-in and was led by the Wichita NAACP Youth Council, a group of mostly high school and college students. The Wichita Youth Council's bold and courageous acts were a testament to the many children, teenagers, and young people across the nation who participated in meetings and marches as forces of change during the Civil Rights Movement. There are 4 themes in the People, Pride, and Promise Project: hope, faith, struggle, and triumph. We're going to explore those themes and begin with hope. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once stated, "Only in darkness can you see the stars." So I have a question for you. Just think in your mind, what does hope look like? Can you describe it? Not the dictionary definition of hope, but something tangible. Think in your mind how you would describe it, even if you were to describe it as a person. I'm going to give you just a second. What does hope look like to you? If I were to describe hope as a person, I'd say hope looks like a bright and determined college student named Ron Walters. Walters was a 20-year-old college student when he organized the Dockham sit-in 1958. He was bursting with expectation for change, and while away at Fisk University, he was inspired to do something to change the unfair treatment of the people in his community, and that's what he set out to do in the summer of 1958. You still can't hear me? Can you hear me better now? Okay, sorry. So no one could hear me. Now, is this better? Okay. No, someone said no. Is this better? Okay. Do I need to go back? You missing anything? Go. Yes, no, maybe, kinda. We talked about hope. Anybody hear about hope? Do you hear about Ron Walters being what I would think hope looked like? Okay. So I'll go back to where I described him being a bright and determined college student. He was a 20-year-old college student when he organized the Dockham sit-in 1958. I can do this. I can do this better. Okay. There we go. So He was bursting with an expectation for change, and while away at Fisk University, Ron was inspired to do something to change the unfair treatment of the people in his community, and that's what he set out to do in the summer of 1958. I have some reflections of Ron Walters.
NAACP national figures who come to town. Ron got the idea that this may be something we should do here, because it was obvious he had experience, I had experience, because we had worked downtown.
At Dr. Walters' core was really one idea. And I don't know where that idea came from, whether it was his family, whether it was the environment he was nurtured and raised in here in Wichita. I don't know where it came from. But the core of Ron Walters can be narrowed down to one basic idea. What does this have to do with the liberation of Black people?
We were Blacks, and Wichita was alive and well in terms of racism and segregation. They didn't mind Black folks sweeping floors, cleaning toilet stools, taking care of white babies. But there were limitations.
Ron was from Wichita, and the way Wichita in 1958 was described to me was that it was an exciting place to be, especially downtown. There were lots of busy shops and restaurants, and many African Americans worked downtown, and during Ron's summer break from college, that is exactly where he chose to work. But working downtown for Ron, as you can imagine, didn't turn out as he expected. Blacks were not allowed to sit and eat at restaurants because the seats at the lunch counters were reserved for whites only. Ron and his friends would have to take their food to go from the back. It was clear to Ron that if something was going to be done about the segregation issue in Wichita, it had to begin downtown. And what better place to make a big impact than one of the most popular eating establishments in Wichita, the Dockham Drugstore. The Dockham Drugstore was not just popular, it was a part of the National Rexall chain of drugstores and was the largest chain in Kansas. It also had, as stated in the clip earlier, one of the worst reputations for discrimination. Ron was certain if change could be made at Dockham, change could happen throughout the community. Now, let me give you a little better picture of Ron Walters. The living members of the Dockham sit-in describe Mr. Walters as a born leader. There was, even before Joan Williams passed away, she talked about how he dressed the part, carrying a briefcase and wearing a necktie when he was a young boy. And he was always ready to conduct business. So it wasn't a surprise when he took on the role as president of the Youth Council for the Wichita NAACP. His cousin Carol Parks joined him as vice president, and Carol's family would host many of the prominent civil rights leaders, as I shared with you earlier. The two cousins proposed to the Youth Council their idea to host a sit-in at the Dockham Drugstore. And it didn't take much convincing, because many of the youth in this council had already participated in protests of stores and restaurants that did not provide equal service to people of color. They were fed up, and they were ready to do what was needed to be done to change what was happening in their community.
Boys and girls.
Good afternoon, Mr. BC.
We had no idea, some in high school, some in college, that the effort that we undertook was going to be so successful.
Were you scared?
You know, that's a good question. Some things had happened in the nation. In 1955, there was a young Black male named Emmett Till who had gone from Chicago to Mississippi to visit his relatives. And he had a lot of cousins there, and he wanted to show them how much he was not afraid, he was a man. Emmett may have made a mistake, though, and that cost him his life. He was accused of whistling at the white store on his wife. He was really killed very cruelly. You wouldn't have been able to known who he was by virtue of the way his face looked. And his mother wanted him to be left that way when he was put in the casket because she wanted the world to know what Ugly had done to her son.
Why did you want to go to the downtown drugstore?
Good question. Dockums was part of a chain. For the most part, blacks were not welcome in eating places unless they carried their food out. You know, it took over a year for our planning, and we did some rehearsal so we'd know what to expect. And we had a little fun with that, but we were treating each other cruel because we had a feeling that that's what we were going to have to expect, that they weren't going to roll out a carpet and say, you black folks are welcome. One of the things that the adults in the NAACP wanted to do with black children, primarily in Wichita, was to come up with an activity whereby we were striving for some level of justice that we weren't able to appreciate and to experience at that time. Example, blacks, for the most part, could not sit down at the lunch counters and eat.
All throughout the civil rights movement was building momentum. All throughout the 50s, the civil rights movement was building momentum, and the Wichita Youth Council was compelled to join young people across the nation that were making bold and courageous stands against inequality. They were fueled, as stated, by Emmett Till's lynching and the Montgomery bus boycott that occurred just a few short years earlier. They were also inspired by the courage of the Little Rock Nine, a group of students who desegregated the Little Rock High School in Little Rock, Arkansas. It was clear that the young people of the civil rights movement wanted change, and they even faced violence and in some cases jail to get it. Many children and women and teenagers and young adults across the nation were doing their part to end unfair practices. Fighting for racial equality was nothing new to blacks in Wichita, especially for Chester I. Lewis, a well-known lawyer in the community. In the 1950s, Wichita was considered one of the most segregated communities in the state of Kansas. Lewis was also president of the adult branch of NAACP and was known fighting against discriminatory practices in Wichita. He was proud. He was described as being a strong man that was not afraid to fight for what was right. And when Chester set out to make a change, my mother verified this. Change happened. When blacks couldn't swim in whites-only pools in Wichita, Chester changed that. And when aircraft companies in the town were segregated, Chester changed that. His determination inspired the youth council, and he gave them his blessing to move forward with the sit-in. Chester mentored youth in the council and gave them hope that they could be successful in their sit-in. And we talked about why the Dockham sit-in is a story of hope, but the Dockham sit-in is also a story of faith. I'm the daughter of a pastor. Now my mother is my pastor. My father passed in 2016, and she carried on the mantle. And I was taught this scripture as a young girl. Faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. The NAACP Youth Council was stepping out on a faith that they were going to see a change that no one in their community had ever seen before. And with the help of their youth advisor, Rosie Hughes, the Youth Council began preparing for the sit-in the spring of 1958. They spent months preparing and training. The students trained by role-playing in the basement of St. Peter Claver Church.
We were fortunate enough because we had members who were part of the church family here to be given permission to do some role playing downstairs, which was a small but important part of what we were trying to accomplish.
Ron Walters was convinced that the work in the church basement would help them to be able to prepare for the unknown while sitting on the stools at the lunch counter. What would they encounter? Would people try to harm them, pour coffee down their backs, or would they endure taunts or violence? They would soon find out. The sit-in officially began at 10 a.m. on July 19, 1958. The students took turns filling the lunch counter stools, and just as they expected, they were refused service. I share with you about Carol Parks. She was the first person to test the sit-in to see if this would, if they were actually going to move forward. And she went to the lunch counter and asked for a Coke. And she was about to be served a Coke because she is a fair woman. She's fair in complexion. And the server didn't know that she was African American until the others started to fill the lunch counters, and she got a little confused, and she asked Carol, she said, "Honey, you're not colored, are you?" And Carol said, "I am." And she said, "Well, you know, I can't serve you, right?" And that's when the sit-in officially began. So the young people, even though they were refused service on that day, they were determined. They intended to stay at their post until they were served. But the manager was not going to bend and would rather close the fountain at the lunch counter than serve the Black students. So a sign was placed on the counter that said, "This fountain temporarily closed." That brings us to the topic of struggle. The great abolitionist leader, author, orator, and statesman Frederick Douglass stated, "If there is no struggle, there is no progress." So there was 1 week that went by, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, the students sat with patience, waiting to rightfully be served. And for nearly 3 weeks, the youth council endured threats, scare tactics, and continued denial of service at the Dockham drugstore. One day in particular, during their sit-in, while the youth council were sitting at the lunch counter, a small group of white youth came to the store, and it seemed to them, the Dockham participants, that they came to start a fight and to disrupt the sit-in. The police were quickly called and that gang left. But just 2 days later, a larger gang came back. And this time, however, when the police were called, they refused to step in and help the youth council. So Ron Walters called on Chester Lewis. Remember I said that he was described as being strong and not afraid to fight for what was right. And Chester got on the phone and called a group of young men. And by the carloads, they came to the aid of the youth council, and they just lined up across the street. And they scared off the bullies. But the incident shook up the youth council. They were getting weary. They'd been there for nearly 3 weeks, and they were not seeing any progress. And they wanted to see change happen, and they didn't see change happening. And so they were getting a little weary. They were in the midst of the struggle. So short clip about the struggle.
We wanted to have them with the same respect and dignity as white citizens to be served at the counter.
We still have to go back in time and think about the fact that this was a time when restroom facilities were segregated, when folks were still riding at the back of the bus, when there were multiple classes on the train, you know, if you were going from one place to the other. And just think about how deeply ingrained racism and segregation was all over the country.
The sit-ins and the sit-in participants may have been getting weary, but they didn't realize that triumph was on the way. I love this quote from Ghanaian author Leila Gifty Akita. She says, "If you stay determined, the obstacles cannot stop your progress. You will triumph over every mountain." In my former job as the director of the Kansas African American Museum, I remember doing research about the Black church. And what I saw about the Black church in Wichita, and even experienced as a child that's born and raised in the church myself, I saw that Sundays were a special time, a special day in this town. And in Ron's community, that was the day that everyone, they dressed in their best, and they dressed to impress. Ladies wore their lovely hats and pretty dresses, and young men wore neckties and their finest suits. And on this Sunday, I could imagine Ron picking out an extra special necktie because Chester Lewis had called a mass community meeting at New Hope Baptist Church. Everyone was there to support and encourage the DOCM sit-in participants. And I know the power of music in a service, and I just, in using my imagination, could hear some inspiring songs, some freedom songs being sung on that Sunday, like, "Ain't gonna let nobody turn me round, turn me round, turn me round, ain't gonna let nobody turn me round, I'm gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up to freedom land." The next day, it's just in my imagination what I heard that service sounding like. The next day, August 11th, 1958, with a new freedom-fighting, protesting courage, one by one, the youth began filling the lunch counter stools at the DOCM drugstore. And I was told that suddenly, the door to the DOCM drugstore opened, and standing in the doorway with the sun to his back was Mr. DOCM himself. He walked into the store, and mind you, just remember, they had been filling these lunch counter stools, all of them, as many as they possibly could. He walked in and he said, "Serve them, I'm losing too much money." That was it. Those words ended the sit-in. The lunch counter at the DOCM drugstore was no longer whites only and was now open to everyone in Kansas, and eventually all Rexall stores in cities all across the nation, large and small. The People, Pride, and Promise Project, the song that you heard at the beginning, says that this is a story of hope. It's a story of faith. It's a story of struggle. It's a story of triumph. And with courage and endurance, this story inspires us all. I have one last short clip for you. When putting together this documentary, we wanted to bridge the gap between generations. And so Mrs. Breckenridge, Carla Breckenridge at Buckner Elementary, opened up her classroom doors for us And so the children that you've been seeing in the documentary clips were her 5th grade students. And we brought together a DOCM participant, Dr. Galen Vesey, who was the humanities scholar for this project. And he traveled wherever we would take the exhibition and the documentary and would speak. But this was very special, him engaging with these young people. And so you'll hear in this final clip, you'll hear from Carla Breckenridge, you'll hear from a student, and then you'll look at what is happening today and the more present. This documentary actually was produced in 2018. However, it is still so relevant, and you'll see why.
What I think young people can learn from the 1958 NAACP Youth Council is that it really takes courage to do the right thing. It takes courage to speak up when you see an injustice taking place. And what they can learn is that we want them to be empowered to do the right thing anytime they see injustice anywhere.
Understanding that just them doing just simply sitting in there and hoping for the best actually changed everything.
As quietly as we began. After 3 weeks, 4 weeks, it was over.
We're talking about a dozen, 2 dozen people over the course of a couple days, right? And yet managed to transform not just that one little business, not just the block around it, but the entire city and the entire country, inspiring the sort of later actions that happen in other parts of the country.
Knowing that you are a part of this bigger humanity, that you can contribute and also you can withdraw from. And so that these children in this climate where sometimes it seems like we're far from it, we know that the triumph is there. We know that we have a past and shoulders to stand where we can lift those babies up and let them peer into the future and see their place and see how they can continue to grow and make a difference.
Today, the youth are at the forefront of the nonviolent civil rights movement.
Show me what democracy looks like. This is what democracy looks like.
As president of the Wichita NAACP Youth Council, I look up to Ron Walters. He organized the DOCM sit-in, and that to me means a lot because as the president, I have the role of leadership.
The DOCM sit-in is a great example of just how powerful these sort of small groups of dedicated people can be.
I mean, if somebody's not going to give you the power to do something, then you just empower yourself. You don't have to sit around and wait for permission. You don't wait on the yes. You don't wait on the no. You don't wait at all. Well, I saw opportunity to really give some people that didn't think they had a voice to get them opportunity to speak out. But around the United States, there was a lot of things that were going on. In Ferguson, you had they were setting the city on fire and things of that nature. I wanted to try to bring some of that here, but just without tearing our city apart, because when you do demonstrations like that, the whole focus is to really build it up. But you saw when they were doing some of those demonstrations that a lot of cities were getting burned down, or neighborhoods, and it was really the neighborhoods of the people that were really trying to say something. They were tearing their own neighborhoods down. So what I wanted to do is try to just bring that here in a fashion that can give us a platform to express ourselves, but just kind of minimize all the damage that was being done to the communities.
Every single successful movement that you see in this country starts that same way, with a couple of usually young people, usually young people who are grounded in and rooted in the experience of their elders who advise them and guide them through the process, right? They don't just do this all by themselves. There are usually wise older folks around them to help steer them without taking the leadership away from the young people. Starts with that small group, and then they manage to succeed.
At the end of the day, I'm trying to do the same thing that those people at the dock I'm sitting were doing, and is just say some things that are not easy to say in the way that's not easy to say them. We have to include ourselves because time after time after time, we're looking at this picture that we know we're supposed to be in, but we can't find ourselves. So now this is our time to put ourselves in the picture, like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. did, Malcolm X, Huey P. Newton, the dock I'm sitting in. They put themselves in the picture that they know where they're supposed to be in, but they can never find themselves. So I just told everybody, this is our time to put ourselves in the picture.
So if you notice one critical thing, especially I wanted to bring to the attention of this group in particular, Ron Walters was the president in 1958. In 2018, 60 years later, it was a woman, a young lady, who was president of the NAACP Youth Council. So that transition, those years had gone by, and a young woman was leading that charge. And so that was very important to share for me. It was important for me because I was excited about that during the time I was advisor. You also saw, and this, it stopped on Priscilla Brown. She is the illustrator of the children's book that we published in conjunction with this project. And you could see through all of the documentary clips, in the backdrop, there were illustrations that might confuse you. Those are illustrations that came from the children's book. And she, Priscilla Brown, is the illustrator of People, Pride, and Promise, the story of the Dockham Sit-In. And we just recently hosted a PBS, or KPTS, event where we had the opportunity to share more, use some of the clips from the documentary, and share more of the story. As a proponent of literacy and an advocate for equity in education, I think it's very important that the story is shared, and we're doing our part to make sure that all third graders in our community have access to this book. And so you'll hear more about that as we move forward.
How can we get copies of this book?
On our website. So if you go to storytimevillage.org /bookstore, you can get a copy of of the book. Really excited about that. It's really fresh and new. But I really want to thank you for the opportunity to share this story. I know we were dealing with some technical difficulties. Hopefully you heard the bulk of the information that I was trying to convey. And we can definitely get, if you couldn't hear those clips, I'll make sure that this presentation, the PowerPoint presentation, is available so that you can share it and you can go back and hear some of those clips that you weren't able to hear before, if you weren't able to hear them.
Excellent. You can stick around for a while, can't you?
Yes.
Okay. Why don't we take a small break?
Okay.
And before we go, let's give a rousing thank you to Priska. I think she did an awesome job.
Thank you.
Let's take a short break, and when we come back, let's ask questions, okay?
Looking forward to it.
Thank you.
Very engaging group of students. I like that.
You guys, let's start to come back for the second half of this class. Couple of things I want to note for you. Some of you have asked about an email that I had sent to each of you. Some of you are in also the Kansas and World War II class. I had them sent to both classes, and they are questions. You will not be graded on this. You are not expected to do these for class. But the questions were just kind of things that would prompt you to tell your memories, to either write them down or tell them to your children, grandchildren, whoever you want to leave your stories to. So I just wanted to provide that for you. It was sent in by Marta Hammond, and I am so glad she did, because it's just an excellent example of how we can record our stories. One other note, and Priska can help me on this, but the Dockham drugstore that we are talking about is in downtown Wichita. It's where the Ambassador Hotel is now. And in fact, there is a memorial that the Kansas Health Foundation donated like $50,000 for this, for a memorial to be made about this sit-in. And so please know, during the course of Wichita's history, there were many Dockham drugstores throughout the community. And I know that many of you are probably familiar with the one that's at Douglas and Hillside with the wonderful tile work on it. And I think she still owns it, Kirstie Alley. Any other news on that?
There were 6 or 8 Dockham drugstores throughout. And when I hosted a presentation for the downtown Rotary, we really talked about, got in more depth about that, because the manager at the time was a Rotarian, and the owners were Rotarians, and so we had some more discussion about that. So there were quite a few. This drugstore was downtown, and I talked to you about how important downtown was during that time. It was a really important place in the community, and if change could happen there, they figured they had that trickle down effect, that it would impact all the other drugstores. So
and a couple of other things to note before we get to your question. I'm so sorry to keep you standing. Oh, okay. Well, of how just entrenched the segregation was in Wichita. Up until the 1960s, African-American residents could not buy homes in certain neighborhoods. And certainly we were one of the last communities in the nation to have busing.
Yeah. A story that was told to me was a cross being burned in Chester Lewis's front yard because he integrated a neighborhood. And so, these were the things that challenged these young people. And I think young people didn't have the fear that the adults had. So they were a little bit more ready to, we're going to make change happen.
And perhaps even naive, as young people are sometimes. I'm just saying.
Yeah, and sometimes you need that to move the agenda forward. In fact, it was so, the National NAACP did not even make a public acknowledgement of this act until the 50 years later. And so, even though they used the model, and when you look at there's documents that show that they were very aware, and they used it as opportunity to move the civil rights agenda forward, and even gave an award at the 50th anniversary to the Wichita Youth Council, but they were it was scary because we started the sit-in movement, and so that was something they were not ready to attach themselves to. So there was a lot that was going on throughout the nation, and then, well, I'll hold back. There's a lot that I can go into.
Let's go ahead and get your question.
Well, you answered a little bit. How big a chain was this Dockham drugstore across the country?
So Dockham was a part of the Rexall brand.
Okay.
Rexall was the state's largest chain of drugstores, and then Rexall was also a national chain. So that's why this was a major. So they could have decided to go. This was strategic. So if they would have gone to another smaller, maybe mom and pop, they may have had the win, the success, but the impact is what was very important. So they went to the drugstore. They had the most. I mean, we just stated there were multiple Dockhams, but then Dockham was Rexall, so there were multiple Rexalls, and so it just continued the progression for the movement to go forward.
But Mr. Dockham, was he probably scared that it was going to blow up on all the rest of his drugstores? Probably.
Well, I think really the real concern to me, just looking at his statement, the major concern for him was a loss of money. These students were coming in and they were filling every lunch stool that was empty, and then they were closing the fountain, and it was so this was hitting the pocketbook. That's what forced them. Otherwise they would have said, oh, just because everyone they wanted it to go away. So you stated earlier that you couldn't find any information in the Wichita Eagle. It was supposed to go away. Don't report on it. Police, don't even go in there. Don't touch this, and these children will stop being pests. And they didn't, and they kept coming back, and they kept filling the lunch counters, and it kept making them lose money. And the loss of money was the reason why the store opened. Serve them. I'm losing too much money.
That's what some of those bus strikes did when the working folks stopped riding the bus.
Strategy.
They weren't making any money, so that's an excellent idea. Okay, where was Mr. Dockham based at? Where
was Dockham the owner?
The owner, he lived here in Wichita.
Oh, he did. Okay,
he was he was a Wichita. He was, well, you have to look at which Dockham there were, but the family was a Wichita family. And there was just recently, I don't know if you have any more information on this, the granddaughter of I didn't want to say the wrong name, because there's the granddaughter of the owner just hosted a Zoom call and had a conversation with living members of the Dockham sit-in.
I heard that. Yes. Now, I'm thinking someone came up to me the first time we met as a class on this and said that they were a waitress at that drugstore. Are you in the audience today? Okay. Oh, okay. Okay, excellent. I got it. Okay. You have a question, and what might it be?
Oh, I had 4 questions, but they all got answered. Well, all but one.
Okay.
Where did Ron Walters work, and what did he do? You said when he was not in school in the summers.
So Ron, I don't know.
Also mention what he ended up doing.
Okay. So Ron Walters, I don't know what his summer job was. But I do know that he was on summer break. I don't know if he decided to work during that time. If he was conducting sit-ins. I don't know if he had much time to do much other than be the president of the NAACP Youth Council on his summer break. But when he was not on summer break, he was a student at Fisk University. And then Ron Walters went on to become Dr. Ronald Walters. He was a professor, and he actually has a school named after him at Howard University. I had hoped to meet him. I had just become executive director at the Kansas African American Museum the year that he passed away. But I did get to meet his wife.
And he was a political consultant for whom?
Look, Ron Walters had a very, well, Jesse Jackson, on his journey to become president, Ron Walters was a political consultant for him, but
he also was a commentator for CNN and where else? Everywhere.
If we went down the list of accomplishments of Ron Walters,
we wouldn't get to any more questions.
But he was such. I was just reading an article about the civil rights and the sit-in movement, and I mean he is considered the father of the sit-in movement, and then he mentored those that followed after him, and so we could go on for a whole day talking about Ron Walters.
Well,
but his wife is carrying on his memory and his legacy. She was here at the Wichita NAACP banquet in 2018, and had a privilege of meeting her and sharing with her the exhibition. So really excited about that.
Just a quick comment, just a side issue. My husband's company moved us from South Texas to Wichita in 1969. And we went house hunting, and we wound up buying a home in the northeast part of Wichita. And when he went to work and told his fellow people where he had bought a home, they all went, oh no. And my children went to Buckner, which was mixed. And I volunteered in the library and had a wonderful time. Mm-hmm. The school had gotten some federal money for Title IX, and they had the best library in town, better than the so-called white schools.
Well, I went to Buckner Elementary. My mom taught at Buckner Elementary, so that's a great school.
Absolutely. I just, as we're waiting for this other woman to come up, wanted to ask you, what role did women play in all of this?
Let's look at the bigger picture of the civil rights movement. What role did women play? We were the foundation. We provided the a lot of, and we know in a male-dominated society that the men were at the forefront. They would be placed in the forefront, but it was the women who laid the groundwork and did all of the things that were not seen. And so when we take a look and really look at the Dockham sit-in based on that knowledge, we know that the women or the organizers and the ones that kind of shape and form. And so, I shared in the presentation about Carol Parks being the vice president, and they together went before the youth council and spoke to them about this journey that they were going to go on. Ron Walters had the world knowledge, the experience from being, going away to school and going to a historically Black college and bringing that back. But the women, and I listed a few of them, the Rosie Hughes of the world, because Rosie Hughes, not only was she the youth advisor, she was a part of a two-person team. Her and her husband had a photography company that captured all of Black Wichita. And so it told a story. She was capturing the historical moments. And I really think that in retrospect, she probably would have, if she would have known what was transpiring and how big this was going to be and how much of an impact it was going to make, I'm sure she and her husband would have captured more of what was happening with the Dockham sit-in. But we have all of these young women that were participating. The youngest that we know was Peggy Wesley, and we do know there were some younger that came, like some siblings that came and participated, but the youngest recorded is Peggy Wesley. And she and all of the women that if you look at, and not just the women, everyone that participated in this sit-in, they went on to achieve really great heights in their personal lives, their careers, and contributed so much to society. So the women, if there were no women in this sit-in, I'm not even certain it would be as successful as it would have been. And maybe I'm just biased, but I'm certain that that's the truth.
You have a question.
Actually, I'd just like to know how many people here have actually gone down on Douglas and looked at the replica of the Dockham drugstore counter and people sitting there. It's just a neat place to go. Just go down on Douglas, walk along, and look at all the especially the Dockham drugstore. How many of you have been there?
That's great. It's less than a block away from the original site, and it's in Chester I. Lewis Reflection Square. So it's been named after Chester Lewis, the area, the little park. It's a city park, and there is a bronze lunch counter. But as you stated, there will be a different memorial that is being developed and created to celebrate.
Absolutely. We don't know what became of the counter, do we?
That's been a search.
I know.
We don't. And that would, when that store was no longer, it could have been demolished for all we know. But we've looked.
So what does it take to be a pioneer woman? What does it take to go beyond what is normal?
In pulling together this project, the project took some time to, the research and the conversations and talking to, so many people that were courageous and fearless during a time when it wasn't safe to be courageous and fearless.
They did it at great risk.
Right. But to be a pioneer woman, to step out and do something first, to pave the way for others, that takes a lot of the things that we talked about today, that whole knowledge, that the faith, that it takes the going through, knowing that you're going to go through struggle, but understanding that with struggle comes triumph. I mean, that pulling this all together helped me so much to understand what these young people were going through, and as a woman, understanding, I could just imagine Carol Parks going first, sitting at that lunch counter, and fearlessly asking, knowing that she would be refused if they knew. But that takes something a little extra. It's not, you can't say, okay, well, I'll wait till someone else decides to do it. You can't watch what's going on. I mean, they were looking at what was going on. They knew this was not an easy thing. They saw, Rosa Parks sitting on the bus. They saw Emmett Till. They saw the schools being desegregated, and they saw how difficult it was. It wasn't an easy feat. So what made them feel like they could do it? It takes a little bit extra, and so.
Are they your role models? I mean, I think of the role models I've had in life.
Mhm.
And I mean, there is a part of me, and I've said this before, but I feel like what was in my grandmother, in my mother, I
Mhm.
mean, they're the same blood that coursed through them
Mhm.
courses through me. And I feel like I have to live up to what they expected.
Definitely. I think I owe it to them to carry on, this message. Serving in that role of youth advisor. I mean, that was such an honor and a privilege to be in that capacity. And I feel like the burden is on me to, if I don't share the story,
Mm-hmm.
and help to spread this message, which is a message of hope.
Mm-hmm.
If I don't do it, I would not be fulfilling the call that I'm supposed to fulfill.
So, what is it, the legacy you are leaving to the future?
The legacy that I'm leaving is my mother taught me a song when I was a kid.
Do we get to hear it?
I'm not going to sing it.
Oh, come on.
But I'll tell you the words. And the words are, if you want to be great in God's kingdom, learn to be a servant of all. And that message of, you have to, it's not about you. It's about what you contribute to society. The legacy comes from you giving everything that you have to make things better. That's one of the reasons why I lead a literacy nonprofit. It's not for me, because nonprofits, you don't set out to say, I'm gonna go be rich one day and then run a nonprofit. That's not the goal. The goal is that you have a cause that you're championing, and you really want to see a community be better because you're in it. And I really like those that, I don't think that these young people knew how big this was going to be, but they were set out to make the community better because they were in it. I want to carry on that legacy. I want to make everything around me better because I'm here.
What words of wisdom would you have for folks like me and, other women in this class? What words of wisdom would you have for us? Because, I mean, in some ways, our careers, we're retired now. So what legacy can we still leave?
It's never too late to leave a legacy. That should never be a thought. Once you stop, and my mom is my biggest example. She started out, she was a teacher, and somehow she found her way at every school that all of her children were at. I guess keeping an eye on us, maybe. But she was a teacher. She retired. Now she's a pastor. She might retire from that and then do something else. There is never a time for you to stop and say, I'm done. There's always an opportunity to leave a legacy, to contribute to society, and there's always something in each of us to give. This is an opportunity for, when you get to a certain place of experience, share that experience with someone else, pass that knowledge down to someone else so that we can glean and learn and do the same. It's a beautiful thing to have knowledge, to have experience, so that you can keep someone from going on a path that is not the path they should go. I always look to my elders for guidance, for, I don't want to repeat something that shouldn't be repeated. I want to gain from what they can share with me. So my advice for anyone at any age to know that it is never too late or too early for you to contribute to the greater good.
Excellent. Well, Priska, I want to thank you for coming. Let us thank her immensely.
Thank you, everybody.
And if you want to stick around, feel free to do that. I'm going to read a couple of the stories that some of the students have sent in. We have had a tremendous response from people who have been taking this class, and I think we have gotten to the point where we just absolutely love some of these stories. I won't read all of them today because I want to save some for the last class. But this one was sent in by Pauline Killo, and it was a rare occasion. 3 generations sitting at the dining room table. The youngest woman went to put the roast in for supper. She took a knife, cut 1.5 inches off the roast. "Why do you do that?" her husband asked. "Because Mom always did." "Why do you do that, Mom?" "Well, because Mom always did." "Well, did you do that, Mom?" "Well," says the grandma, "I didn't have a big enough pan." We follow the footprints of our ancestors. As long as I have my grandmother's mementos and memories, Grandma lives. For me, that is so true. When I no longer have them, she dies. My only hope is that someone will remember her when I am gone. The best thing I can leave my children is a good name. To be remembered well means a lot. That was well done. This is from Marty Hammond. And again, it's about that email that was sent out to you. She said, both the World War II class and the Pioneer, thank you so much, Priska. You are awesome. That both the classes have inspired me and triggered memories I did not remember for a long time. Thank you for the inspiration. Okay. My mother-in-law always said that she had many sayings. Youth is wasted on the young. I'm living proof of that. There are so many things that I wish I would have asked my ancestors. So, in an attempt to help stop that, I am encouraging to the point of forcing sometimes them to ask me questions about myself and their ancestors. I am also trying to write down answers to the questions on the document I have attached. And these questions come from the book, Grandma, Tell Me Your Story. So I just wanted to share that with you. Let's see. And let's, if we can, go to my slide, if you can, and go down to like the 11th, 12th. Should be, oh, I think we've already had that one. Hold on. Let me see. This is Patricia T. Meyer sent this one in. There are 2 women who have had a major influence on my life, Cindy Simpson and Dr. Helen Reiner. When I finished my 2nd year of college, I was having some problems and was hospitalized. My psychiatrist told me I would never be able to finish college. Cindy Simpson was my therapist, and she literally talked me through my last 2 years of college. So I did get my bachelor's. Later on, when I was diagnosed with schizophrenia, Helen was there. She let me know that I could still function and enjoy life. Both of these women were strong. They taught me to be stronger, not to be afraid to ask for help when I needed it, and to not be ashamed of what I am. Patricia, I just wanted to thank you for sending that in. I don't know about you guys, but there are women who have helped me along the path. And certainly, Carolyn Smith was my counselor for years and is a dear, dear friend now. And it just helps to have these mentors. And so, I want to thank you for having the courage to send that in, because I think we all sometimes just need to have some help. And it's good to know when you and recognize when you do. This is from My Greatest Influencer by Veda Trice. My greatest influencer was my country school teacher, Mrs. Lupier. She was from Oklahoma. She taught 8 students every day. Every morning, she would start class by reading the Bible. Something you would not be able to do in this dang age. This one morning, I will never forget. She read about Jesus Christ crucifixion aloud to the class. After she did, she laid her head down on the desk and cried. She looked up at us all and said, "What he went through for me and us." She was a great witness in my lifetime. And I think I'm going to save these others for next time, if that's okay. Any questions or comments that you guys have for now? Okay. Well, I sure have enjoyed getting together with you today, and I hope the folks online have as well. And next week, we will have Erica Nelson, who is also a humanities speaker, and I look forward to seeing you then. Take care. Oh, yes, Carolyn, we have one more question. Okay.
This week was the 100th anniversary of the final approval of women's suffrage. And one thing that we can do as pioneer women today is make sure that we vote and encourage our friends to vote in whatever direction we all want to vote. We've had one convention this week. We'll have another next week. We have lots of choices. They're important choices, and no one should stay home from voting. You can vote by mail. You can take your ballot in. Don't stay away from the polls.
That is an excellent point. All right, you guys, stay safe, stay well. See you next week.